大家晚上好，欢迎大家来到国际培训大咖五十谈，我是顾立民。上一期我们非常荣幸的带领大家呢，我们一起访谈了著名的 Dr. Marcy Driscoll 教授。Marcy Driscoll 瑞斯克尔教授呢，他是非常著名的一位学者。那么他是佛罗里达州立大学教育学院的院长。长达13年的时间在2-3年前呢，刚刚光荣退休。在访谈中呢，我们谈及了课程设计就是教学系统设计、教育心理学等等话题，并涉及到了未来如何去定义课程设计、教学系统设计等等，以及它应该如何拥抱教学系统设计应该如何拥抱科技，以及在乌卡时代我们如何培养综合性的人才等等。那么还有呢，就是 Dr. Marcy Driscoll 教授呢，通过他的这个工作的努力呢，在他的领导之下，那么佛罗里达州立大学的教育学院成为了全球最重要的几所顶尖的在我们这个领域学习发展领域顶尖的这个学府之一那么很多的大师，包括罗伯特加涅等等，很多的这些大师们的传统呢，都非常非常的精心的保留了下来，保护了下来，并且呢，在不断的继续的得到了发扬和光大。所以呢，在这里非常感谢 Dr. Marcy Driscoll 教授，我们会跟您时常的联系，而且呢，不断的向您请教。今天晚上我们又一次非常荣幸的请到了另外一位非常重量级的嘉宾那么他的名字呢叫 Dr. Karen Watkins。Dr. Karen Watkins 呢叫凯伦·沃特金斯教授他是乔治亚大学 University of Georgia 终身教育行政与政策系的这个主任和副主任那么他呢几十年呢研究呢一直在着重研究呢在组织发展和学习型组织这个领域，并且呢出版了很多本的专著。那么本期的话呢，我们将围绕着 OD 就是组织发展以及学习型组织 Learning Organizations 等等向他请教。特别是呢，还有一个著名的这个工具这个工具呢叫做量表就是它的这个学习型组织的这个量表。Dr. Watkins 呢，他曾经担任过 AHRD， 就美国人力资源开发学会的主席，是在1994年到1996年的时候那时候有的小伙伴可能也刚刚出生还或者刚刚上学。而且呢，他在2003年呢他就入选了国际成人教育及成人局继续教育名人堂所以呢，他也是在世界上也非常著名的一位学者、教授和这个实践家。所以呢，我们下面闲话少叙，我们下面就隆重有请 Dr. Karen Watkins. Hi, Karen. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for taking the time to be on Training Master Series.
That's my pleasure.
It is our great pleasure too. And this is probably during the pandemic, this is probably the closest we can get. Otherwise, I'll come to Athens to meet you.
That would be great. Well, maybe after.
Yeah, maybe later. Yeah, when the pandemic is over. So, Dr. Watkins, Doctor, but I just address you as Karen. Okay, all right.
That's quite fine.
Thank you, Dr. Watkins. Thank you, Karen. First of all, for our audience, would you please introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us where you grew up, where you went to college, and what you studied, and tell us where you live or work now.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, I grew up in Wisconsin. I grew up on a farm in Lodi, Wisconsin, and I went to St. Olaf College for my undergraduate in Minnesota, and I studied English there. Yes. And after I got my baccalaureate, I went to the University of Wisconsin at Madison for my master's degree, again in English. And I taught English for 10 years at Miami-Dade Community College in Florida. As I was teaching, I also was interested in innovation. So I pulled together a group of faculty to redesign the English curriculum. And I got the attention of a woman who's been called the mother of organization development in community colleges, and Carol Zion. and she pulled me into her group. And so actually from in my earliest teaching years, I had gone through my undergraduate in 3 years and my master's in one, so I was quite young. But she pulled me into faculty and organizational development. So I did that for a number of years at Miami-Dade Community College, and then I decided to get my doctorate at the University of Texas at Austin. And while
Mhm.
there, the reason I went there was because I was at a workshop, you'll like this, an organization development workshop in Minnesota, where I met Dr. Oscar Mink, who knew that I told him I was interested in, in doctoral programs. And he said, well, you have to come to Texas because we're about to get a multi-million-dollar Kellogg grant to do faculty and organizational development around the United States. So they recruited me. By the time I came home from Minnesota, I had a letter of offer from University of Texas in my mail, and so I had a scholarship, full scholarship, and a job doing faculty and organizational development. We would go to class for a couple days and then spend 3 days somewhere in the U.S. or Canada doing workshops for faculty in that. And while there at Texas, Dr. Oscar Mink asked me to work with him to help found the HRD academic program, which I eventually taught in. And I taught there. I was in Texas for 15 years. And then I was recruited to come and build a similar program at the University of Georgia, which is where I have been since. And so now, we have a program in learning, leadership, and organization development, and I'm a
Mhm.
professor in that program.
Mhm.
So that's where I am now and what I'm
Mhm.
doing. So
So you built the program at the University of Georgia from the very beginning, from the ground
yes,
up.
yeah, there was an existing department of adult education, and and actually in Texas, that's the program that we joined.
Mhm.
Oscar and I joined the adult education program at Texas, so it was really adult education and human resource development. And the same thing was true when I first came to Georgia. In fact, that's why our name is Learning, Leadership, and Organization Development. But what we brought, which was unique in the country, I was involved in all of the early um, workshops that ASTD had on trying to understand what was happening in academic
Mhm.
programs. So I was part of that beginning as we really conceptualized the academic discipline of HRD. Len Nadler, all of the people were there
Mhm.
in Williamsburg at that first meeting. And but our program, although it was built around the ASTD competencies, our strength was really organization development. And most
Mhm.
of the programs were a little more focused on training. So although
Mhm.
we certainly emphasized training as well, but we had a lot of expertise in organization development. And that's actually what I brought with me to Georgia. So our program here also is very well known for its very strong emphasis in knowledge and skills related to leading organizational change. And so,
Mhm.
in fact, we have an EDD here that uses an action research dissertation that is, it's really about leading organizational change. And people have to do a change project that they then
Mhm.
study as their dissertation.
What is learning leadership? I know there's sort of, but not really a related higher education administration, but this is a more kind of a professional learning leadership. Is that are you fostering leadership roles, or people can carry out leadership roles and responsibilities and duties of a learning organization?
That and what we just realized is that we never really had leadership in our title, but in fact, most of the people who came, they were either going to be an academic or they were going into leadership roles, or they were in leadership roles, but they wanted expertise. And so we have really enhanced the leadership focus in our program. But our leadership is adaptive leadership. It's focused on transformational leadership. It's so you would so it is very tied still to our commitment to understanding organizational change. So it is about, but it's also about leading learning, because many of the people are leading learning enterprises, either in
Mm.
higher education or in corporate settings. And so, how do you lead learning? Um, well, I think you build a learning culture. And so, yes, it is very tied to the notion of organizational learning or the learning organization.
Have your students become CLOs or the chief training office or chief learning officers, and sort of that their career path is toward that direction, right?
We certainly have people with a vice president of learning and development, or those kinds of roles in our group. From the University of Texas, we also have people that were like head of organization development for high tech firms and that kind of thing. So yes, many of them do achieve those levels.
Learning leadership and OD program, that is very unique. I haven't seen them. Is this the very one in the United States or even
It
in the
is.
Western
It is.
countries?
Although we've seen people beginning to pull more of the language, into their programs. George Washington is sort of similar, but actually, Teachers College had leadership in their title. Their adult learning and leadership, so ALL. But we wanted adult learning to be present because it's still a core capacity, but increasingly. The word adult education, just didn't resonate with people anymore. And so we dropped that. So,
Right, right.
but we still have, we tell people that the pillars of our program are adult learning, leadership, especially, transformative or adaptive leadership, and organization development.
That's a very unique name that certainly differentiate your program from all the other programs in the United States and the world, I guess. And just a little background, Karen. The OD has become just in recent, like past 2 or 3 years, suddenly become very popular. OD.
Oh, yes.
So yeah. So, but the people are just kind of going crazy about that idea. And then suddenly in the year of 2017, I remember there are conferences about OD, this OD, that OD. But can you tell us, as an OD professor, HRD professor, can you tell us what is an OD and what is the relation between OD and training or learning per se?
Well, of course, in the U.S., increasingly training is called learning and development, and the HRD is gone. Training, you don't see very as much, and so, but organization development is really about system-wide change. The organization development, you work from the group up. It's not focused like. Training and learning and development are very individual focused. What do you need to build your capacity? In organization development, your job, I think, is to be much more strategic and focused on the vision of the organization and its mission, and what it is that we need to do to enhance it, to create high levels of organizational performance. And
Mhm.
so you can see that all of my work around the learning organization is clearly focused on what are the dimensions that you need to pay attention to in order to build a healthy organization. So organization development works at, some people call it organizational effectiveness in some organizations, I know. Uh, but it is about capacity building of the organization itself. And what are the systems and processes we need to put in place? And particularly those that will enhance our ability to be agile, our ability to change quickly. In this context, of course, we found out that people can change on a dime if they need to. Um, but to do it in a planful way, organization development is the study of planned change. And it's creating people who have skill in planning and implementing change.
At an organizational level, and not instead of
Yes,
at the individual level. And the individual level, the learning and development can take care of it, right?
that's right.
So at organizational level is OD, and training level is, I mean, individual level is the learning
Hmm.
development to take care of them separately. So the when OD suddenly appeared, kind of erupted, and now it's a little bit died down because there's no continuum, you know what I mean? There's no kind of delivery, or I mean, there's a real OD structure. I mean, successful cases or methodology can deliver results. And then by the end of last year, OD's surge is kind of a little bit died down here in China. And I attribute it to the reason, to the lack of methodology in China, because in China, there's not a lot of OD professors or methodologies or studies, at least on the theoretical side. So my question to you, can OD fit into like fast developing economies like China? Or does OD only fit into organizations like in the developed countries like the United States?
Oh, definitely. I think it can fit anywhere. I mean, in the Facilitating Learning Organizations book that Victoria and I wrote, we interviewed, CEOs of learning organizations and also the organization development people who worked with them. And in all of the cases, they were companies of, like 600. They were not thousands of people like the IBMs of the world. And
Right.
but I think where some of the developing world has struggles is with letting somebody who's not, the vice president, be the coach on the side. So
Mhm.
and whereas in these companies, the person who had the organizational change mission, their job was to help the CEO redesign and transform the organization. So
Mhm.
they attended to a lot of the people work. They helped strategize. But they worked like a team. So in a very hierarchical context, it is difficult unless you see the value. Now, yeah, I would tell you that two of those companies that we looked at
Mhm.
were pretty hierarchical, but they saw tremendous value in the skills that the organization developer brought. And so the organization developer, generally speaking, does not have a CEO kind of level title. They report to that person.
Mhm.
They have to report to the top if they're actually going to, you can't work on the organization unless you're at that level. So, but they don't have to be the president. I mean, actually, it's pretty hard to be the CEO and run a change initiative. So they become the legs of the change initiative while the CEO attends to the million other things they have to do. So I think it would work as well, as long as um, the CEO didn't feel in any way threatened by, you know, kind of giving over, ceding a certain level of control um,
Mhm.
of the initiative. But I think that's the key. Is that it has to be a
Mhm.
partnership. They have to work like a kind of a team um, in order for this kind of thing to work. And you can also have people doing this kind of work lower in the organization. So you can have a division that is working to transform itself in some way. But
Mhm.
I think uh, the planned change approach is a little more difficult in a context where you have to pivot overnight, right?
Right.
But the skills and knowledge you need to think through are still there. So you absolutely, however, need the power of the top of the organization. Somebody has to, have that kind of power for any of this to take place.
So the OD director is a change agent. Can I call it change agent? Agent
Hmm.
is that help the organization
Yes.
transform from one stage to the other. It's like a lubricant between the departments, and then help building the organizational learning culture, organizational atmosphere, to boom it up and morale and everything. Is
But
that
also, there are also people who often do, a lot of diagnostic work. So they might be measuring. So they should be letting the CEO know, we've got a problem over here of morale in Division X. Here are some things that might work to fix that. So the CEO doesn't have time to go look for that kind of thing. So they should also be kind of looking at learning analytics, perhaps, or I would say really more organizational climate and culture. Looking, in the US, we would say they would be the people that would conduct employee engagement surveys, and they would figure out what to do about it. So,
right?
uh, that would be the kind of thing they did. So,
Right, right. I'm gonna about mention the employee satisfaction surveys or 360,
yeah,
survey for management development. As well.
yes,
So there's a lot of inventories for them to use during at their work. So OD directors normally big organizations in China or in the United States, they have the role called OD directors, more kind of drawing the attention instead of OD specialists or OD managers. And so my question to you is, can OD managers do anything? I mean, except, besides the operational, how to conduct survey, or OD specialists or OD managers, can they cast any impact rather than the OD directors? Because OD works are more kind of a high level, organizational level. You have to dialogue, initiate dialogues with different departments and the big potatoes in the company, and then try to go around and find boom up the organizational climate. I'm focusing on the organizational learning, right? I mean OD right now, so if you can see, I'm kind of swapping them
it's
around.
fine. That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about our dimensions of a learning organization, these are not things that only one of the dimensions fits neatly into learning and development. The first, that the first dimension is provide continuous learning
Hmm.
opportunities, right? So, and actually, it's an extremely difficult one. I should go back to one of your questions actually, because I think it would be useful to you.
Yes.
You said, what does HRD include? And back
Right.
in 1989, actually, I was asked actually by Malcolm Knowles to write a chapter, and 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 in it I was asked to define human resource development, and I defined it then as that the job of human resource development is to foster a long-term learning capacity at the individual, group, and organizational levels. And this means that HRD includes, but is not limited to, training, career development, and organization development. So I still think, I think all of my writing and work is oriented toward that I'm trying to think about how does an organization foster a long-term learning capacity at all of these levels. That so the learning capacity of the organization is the learning organization work, but at the individual level, it's all about bolstering and fostering a full spectrum from formal to informal to incidental learning, that to envision all of those aspects. And of course, we've also done research that indicates there's a positive correlation between um, investment in informal and incidental learning and creating a learning culture. So
Uh, Tell me if I'm wrong. Yeah, just now, I mean, go back go back two questions. When you said one sentence, HRD is gone. Is that what I heard?
and in the US, you don't hear that very often anymore. I mean, of course, we
Okay,
still have the Academy of HRD and we have programs like that.
AHRD,
But if you go
right?
inside a corporate setting, you'll see learning and development most of the time. Some variation on learning and development.
Okay,
Sometimes training, but you don't see human resource development very often at all anymore.
no, that's true here too.
Is
I mean,
it?
China is also kind of a follow suit what America has gone through during the past like 20, 30 years.
Yeah. So do you call it learning and development also?
Yes, it used to be called, the personnel department and the training
Right,
function,
right,
and
right.
then called the training center, the training department, and the training function, and then called a learning development. Well, it was about 10 years ago, start to realize, training is only, one of many ways to facilitate learning. And then so suddenly
Exactly.
everybody called, to change to learning development, and then kind of a bigger name. And of course, 10 years ago, corporate university become bigger. I mean, a big wave, kind of a tsunami to all of the Chinese companies. And um, opposite to the US, and corporate university became very, very popular in China. So
Hmm.
that's what it is now. And companies still trying to build up a corporate university. Of course, and that was because Motorola University gave us a lot of inspirations in the early 90s. In 1992, Motorola University China operation uh, was built. Actually, on this show, on the Training Master series, I interviewed Bill Wickinghorn, who was the founder of Motorola University. You probably know him.
Yeah, I just
And
talked to him a few weeks ago. He and I are, yeah, we're both connected to. I'm on the board of the Geneva Learning Foundation in Switzerland, and so is he. And it's about innovations in training and development. There's a thing, if you haven't heard it, the Learning Hack, HACK from England. They they do podcasts, and several of us from the board have been invited to speak. And Victoria and I did a session for the Learning Hack also. But so you'll find a lot of interesting people there that that are trying to uh, you know push the edges of learning and development.
great. Yeah, that's so that's the name changes in China gone through quite a bit, but it will only concentrated during the past 20 years,
Hmm.
after the millennium, and things start to change. So HRD, well, right now HRD, the word it refers to HR director actually in China. It's not referred to HR development. It's more kind of a job role.
Yeah.
Any- Yeah, and I'm so glad you just mentioned the word dimensions, because one of my questions is to ask about your famous the dimensions of learning organizations questionnaire, the DLOQ.
Very good. It's used in China, It's been used a number of times. Yin Yang at Tsinghua. Is that how you pronounce it
Tsinghua University, yeah, top
in
one.
Beijing?
I remember.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's a department head there, but he's also done a lot of work, with the DLOQ in China. So the dimensions of a learning organization is based on the model that we developed. Victoria Marsick and I um, had been, writing together, and both of us, um, we had this vision that, we needed to, uh, you know, follow on from the fifth discipline. We read Peter Singe's book. We read Organizational Learning by Chris Artris and Donald Schoen, and we felt like this was an inspiring vision for where we could go in HRD. And
Hmm.
at the same time, they didn't really talk about learning. As you read it, it was definitely thinking about managers or individuals, but not under.
Hmm.
So we wanted to understand what would be different if an organization really was a learning organization. So we read, everything that was written that we could find on organizational transformation. We held workshops with people in HRD and leadership. We, and we basically um, talked to people who said they were trying to create learning organizations. So we particularly talked to some of the organization developers initially, and we read case accounts of people that were doing that work. And so we came up with these initially we had 6 primary characteristics. You'll like this. We left
Mhm.
off leadership, which of
Oh.
course, we were kind of grassroots adult education people, and so, but we learned very quickly that just simply didn't describe what was happening. That in fact, the 6 dimensions are kind of necessary, but the one that is the pivot is the leadership. And so our dimensions are, that you have to create continuous learning opportunities. Um,
Mhm.
you promote inquiry and dialogue. That this is that culture that Ardress and Schoen talk about, where people can ask questions, or that they're not afraid to speak, or they can, because they'll be punished in some way. So that, how do
Mhm.
we do that? And you know the kind of thing that I think in kinship cultures is collective cultures is a very common thing in the US, is you have to work at. The third one was that there has to be a sense that we're all part of the same team. So we said that you have to encourage collaboration and team learning. One of the people we interviewed said we're teaming with teams, but but they are not and actually they were self-directed teams. They were doing many of the things that were popular at that time. But they said that really that is not as important as the fact that what we're really cultivating is a sense of we're all in this together. That really that it's the power. So it's a cultural thing of collaboration. We
Mhm.
also said that you have to have systems to capture and share learning. So this
Mhm.
was, and this was really more than it includes knowledge management. So we had looked at knowledge management tools that people were using, but we
Mhm.
also looked at things like Motorola would do town hall meetings of best practices. They would bring everybody together that had done something interesting and self-directed work teams, and they would share with each other. Or
Right.
nuclear power companies we found had these hotline newsletters that would go out. If anything happened, they would tell everybody in the world, um, what to look for and how to fix it and that kind of thing. So there were all of these ways people had to capture and share learning that we thought were you just have to have that. Otherwise, you get wisdom drained. The knowledge goes out the door when the people turn over. So you can see that that's a system level characteristic, right?
Mhm.
So the
Mhm.
individuals will do the capturing and sharing learning, but the system has to be committed to making sure that they don't lose best practice. Empowering people toward a collective vision. We had several examples of situations where at Johnsonville Foods, the CEO told a story about people would come in the morning, and the CEO's job was to sit and eat the pieces of sausage that they had made the day before, and decide what the quality was. And he said, "Well, isn't that ridiculous? I have no idea what happened yesterday that would create the quality of sausage today. The people who
Mhm.
know that are the people who made it." So he had them taste their own sausage. So
Mhm.
he empowered them then to, once they tasted it and they could tell there was a little bit too much water in the mix, they could go back and fix the mix so that it worked correctly. But so the vision was clear that we wanted highest quality possible. So, and then we also said that they had to connect to the environment. I also, speaking of, we've been talking about Motorola a bit, but I had done some work with Motorola and interviewed people in learning and development. And,
Mhm.
one guy said to me, he says, "Well, I'm worried about what's happening in Korea right now, and
Mhm.
the guy was a first level supervisor. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And I said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Well, they might be inventing something that will put us out of business." So he was scanning the environment for potential threats and opportunities. And that was top to bottom was the point. Motorola had made that just a way of living in the organization. And we thought that was a very powerful example of kind of environmental awareness that you have to have. And of course, now we would talk about sustainability and other things. And then later we added, after the interviews with CEOs, that provided strategic leadership for learning. So it's a very particular kind of leadership. And it's really, leaders modeling learning themselves. At Land O'Lakes in Minnesota, the
Hmm.
leader established book clubs where people would read the latest management book and then talk about the implications for the company. And they would do those kinds of things. So it was leadership for learning. At Covidian, we did interviews, and we found that we were looking at the executive suite, and these people could tell you the exact next thing that their subordinates needed to learn in order to, be able to take their job someday. And they were, aggressively making sure that those people were learning what they needed to learn. So it was, it was very clear to us that if you want to have a learning culture, then you have to have people modeling it at the top. And so that was strategic leadership for learning. And, along the way, I've always been interested in making tools. Oscar Mink used to say that organization developers are tool makers. And so we developed and validated the dimensions of a learning organization questionnaire. And of course, I was surrounded by people who did questionnaire develop. Bei-Yin Yang from Tsinghua University was very helpful to me in helping to help me understand how to validate the instrument that we developed. And so we worked together, and another colleague, and ultimately created a measure that has proven reliable in I don't know how many countries are, it's used all over the world. Actually, it's in Africa, New Zealand, Australia, Europe, everywhere. And it's in just, that many languages as well. And each time it has come back reliable, which I attribute to really to the work that we did with Bei-Yin Yang, and making sure on the front end that all of the items that we kept were useful. So we can go into an organization and help them very reliably look at the culture to see where their strengths and weaknesses are. And you should sort of hear in this, as compared to perhaps other people who talk about the learning organization or organizational learning, a very high emphasis on culture. You know, um,
Hmm.
I'm a strong believer of what somebody wrote, that culture trumps strategy every time. That it's that if you want an organization to be more agile, to be able to pivot quickly, that it's all about creating the culture that will allow that to happen. And that's really, so our 7 dimensions are intended to help pivot a culture, really. And so these are the things that we think you pay attention to.
Great. This 7 dimensions. How many questionnaires do you? I mean, how many questions do you have in that entire questionnaire? I've seen some forms online. I
Yes.
haven't seen an actual form yet, but
Oh, well, I can send you one if you ask. Um, well, we actually have 3 versions. Well, actually, we have many versions because there's a lot of different languages. But the original has 43 items that are the 7 dimensions of a learning organization, and then we have 12 items that measure organizational performance, knowledge, and financial performance. Um,
mhm.
and then with the work of some doctoral students, we've added 2 other intangible performance measures, because the L&D function is most highly correlated with the intangible assets of an organization. It's knowledge performance. The L&D helps build new products, performance processes, new
Mhm.
services, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
so now we have another measure called adaptive performance, which is about agility and the ability to pivot. Um, and then another student worked with nonprofit organizations and added mission performance. So that's the basic questionnaire in its initial form. But Dr. Yang also worked with us to develop short forms. So a very popular version of the DLOQ is the 21 item version, which is three questions for each
Hello, Karen?
dimension. Yeah, the other two versions
Questionnaires.
are a 21 item and a 7
Right.
item. The 7
Okay.
item is useful if you want to add it to some other questionnaire. So it basically says, do you have a learning culture or not? Whereas the 21 item is actually, it is highly correlated to the 43 item. So with the 21 item, you can faithfully identify where your organization is relative to each of these 7 dimensions.
Great. Do you do you have along the years have you done like accumulated kind of a database that kind of set up a standard of organizations and who is the A's and the B's and C's and something like that to grade them?
Well, I don't do that, but we
I don't
do
know.
have a pretty extensive database. We did a study, Khalil Durrani and I, doing a meta-analysis of data from 28 different studies. So we had over 8,000
Wow.
responses that we could look at. And so what we did is we developed norms we divided into for-profit and nonprofit because they had quite an extensive government and nonprofit set of studies within that data set. And I think we had about 6,000. Well, it was heavily oriented toward for-profit. The interesting thing was that, at least in our data, the pattern was identical. It's just that the for-profit organizations tended to score a bit higher. So that I thought was significant, that the highs and lows, and it was also from 5 different countries. But where we got different patterns is when you looked at different countries. That country culture does matter. There's just no question that for some of the things that we measure, Asian countries do much better. They are much better at capturing knowledge. They have systems that, and inquiry and dialogue is very strong. In the Southern Hemisphere, in South America, for instance, inquiry and dialogue is quite good, and collaboration and team learning, because, there's just a strong emphasis in those things. Really most of the cultures, there's a pretty strong emphasis on leadership for learning. I think this is not an uncommon thing. But the cultures vary a lot on empowering people toward a collective vision. Some cultures don't empower at all, and some cultures are very strong on that. And environmental scanning, people vary quite a lot.
Right.
How much they do of that. So.
Right.
Yeah.
So the 7 dimensions, I would say they're the major characteristic of the learning organizations as well. They're co-related, and
yes.
And that's a quite of information for our viewers to observe.
Well, I think it's important because what we find is that, at least from my perspective, and I think other people as well, having an instrument that's valid, first of all, is pretty important because you can trust the results that you get. But the other thing is that this work really validates the learning and development function, because
Right.
we can show you in study after study that there is a
Right.
significant relationship to enhanced organizational performance. And we've had, Andrea Ellinger and others, Barb Daly at Milwaukee, have looked at not just our performance measures, which are perceptual, but looked at hard measures of performance, the return on asset, return on investment, that kind of thing. And they could show you that there is, in fact, a correlation between a high learning culture, which I believe L&D and organization development have a lot to do with, in an organization, and performance. So that's been my mission, has been to try to show the relationship so that people can see how strategically important it is to have a strong learning function in an organization.
One of the guests on my show that said one sentence I totally agree, is that the organization that in the future survives or thrives will be the ones that learn the best. And it is always true.
It
But
is.
I never found any evidence, and probably this DLOQ is a bar. I mean, can it serve? Have you used it to serve as a bar to go out and measure an organization and use it as a business analysis tool or measurement tool to measure them, and then you find they have some gaps, and then give out them advices, and then charge them run it as a business?
No, yeah, we have actually. Yeah, we've worked with quite a
That's
number of
great.
companies in that way. And the thing I try to do is I always, I'm leery of norms, having seen the cultural differences when you go, to another
Oh
country.
yeah.
that that you should definitely focus on a norm that relates to your context in some way. So it's I worked with one company that's a conglomerate. It's a financial portfolio
Mhm,
company.
mhm.
So they have like Bell Helicopters, one of their people, and Toro lawnmowers. So in a company like that, they are a collective of organizations themselves. So when we looked at their scores, we look at the pattern of highs and lows. What are you doing well at, and what are you not doing well at? And
Right.
when I looked at recently at PepsiCo, we did a project with PepsiCo just this
Mhm.
year, and so again, what we did there that was kind of fun is we sent it out to 200 people in the L&D arena, so that we could literally look at the learning culture within the learning department. Um, and so I think I thought, first of all, it was really good that they did that, and second, they had some interesting highs and lows. They were a pretty strong organization, as you may know. But so yes, we do use it in a diagnostic capacity.
Right.
In Korea, Young Sang Kim, from one of Victoria's students, is in one of the ministries, and then he works with small and medium-sized enterprises, and
Uh-huh.
he created a portfolio of interventions that, first of all, he'd give the DLOQ to everybody. So he went out to all these small, like hundreds of small and medium-sized companies, and then he would use the DLOQ to tell them, okay, here's these things that we can do for you. You could create a learning center of resources, to have continuous learning, and
Mhm.
so he had sort of things matched to the scores that they got on their dimensions. So that was a really, really interesting project that he did.
That's great. I mean, that's
Yeah,
great.
yeah, that's
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 great.
Victoria's and he have written that up, but it was a really neat intervention. So, and a creative, he created those responses. The with small and medium-sized companies, you couldn't create the kind of university, like Motorola University or something.
Right.
So he this sort of menu of choices, of things that they could ask for in order to improve their learning culture, were quite neat. And then he would go in and test them again. Did their
Right.
learning culture improve?
And later on, if you can give me the name of that your colleague in China at Tsinghua University, that'd be great.
Bei Yin Yang. I can even write it in the chat if you like.
Yeah, if you can.
Yes, he's
And
quite
I would like to
wonderful.
contact her and see how she's doing. And
Yeah, it's actually a him. I might be pronouncing it, but it's
it's a gentleman.
mhm, yep. Yes, he also
Okay.
studied at Georgia and Minnesota, so
Ah,
you'll
really?
have much in common. So
Yeah, yeah.
He
So do
taught
you,
it. He was on the faculty. I'm sorry, he was on the faculty at Minnesota for a while.
okay. Do you have his email? If you can later on, after
Yeah,
the
yeah,
talk,
yeah, yeah,
and they
yeah.
can give me the email, and then I would like to contact him and see how he is using the DLOQ.
I
I
don't
mean,
think
there
I don't
must
think he
be,
is anymore. He did, this
he
was
did some
earlier
studies.
work. Yeah,
Yeah.
now he's
The reason I'm
he's an
mentioning it,
administrator.
oh, okay. The reason I'm mentioning it is right now corporate university is booming so fast in China, and learning organizations, and they are becoming more and more important. And the CEOs and chairmen in China, not only the big enterprises are always the SOEs, the state-owned enterprises, but the majority are the SMEs. So it is very similar to what happened in Korea. Like in the developing countries, if we had this kind of DLOQ as a diagnostic tool, and come in and measure them, and then give them some advices, and then followed with
Yeah.
interventions, and that will give that university a direction to go, where to
Yes, it
go,
would.
where to what to
That would be
what
organization development in a really neat way. So it would be very cool. Yeah, that would be neat.
Yeah, that'll be, because they're I mean, they're like teenagers. They need those kind of nutritions, but they don't never had a bar. So
Right.
right now, what's happening is most of the companies build corporate universities, we don't have anything to follow. The models like Motorola University is gone. I used to work for Ericsson China Academy. So it's also the second corporate university in China, started in 1996. It's also gone. So we don't have any models, but China needs that, because there's like
Yes.
at least 1,000 corporate universities, new corporate universities in the past like 3-5 years, and they're sitting there with a big name, but they're doing all the training job. They rarely do OD jobs. That's why the OD came up, and then died down again. I mean,
Well,
because
that
there's no
happened a lot in the US too, where they didn't they called something OD because they got paid more, and but it really was just training. And so
right.
uh, people figured that out pretty quickly, that they weren't really doing anything special. And so yeah, I think if you're not working at the group or above, so the group would be the unit level, you're not
Right.
doing OD. You've got to be dealing with an entity that is at least the size of a department, or a programmatic unit, um, just to really say that you're doing organization development.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Um, we have lingered around on
I
the
know. As
organization
I said,
learning
we've
only
we've
for
only got
such a long
15
time.
minutes left, so
I know. I'm
um,
sorry about that.
that's all
Let's
right.
switch gears very quickly, but I do want to ask you about what is incidental learning, and how is it different from the informal learning?
Very good. Yeah, you asked the right person, because that was my half of the book, that when Victoria and I wrote Informal and Incidental Learning, because I'm fascinated by incidental learning. Informal learning is all the things you can think of. People, um, you know, mentoring, coaching, communities of practice, action learning. All of them have in common that they're not in a classroom, and they are kind of open-ended, so there's not a fixed goal or objective, um, but but they do have direction. So the individual has some sort of goal in mind. Incidental learning is the learning that happens when you're doing something else. So when it's
Mm.
the everyday learning that happens on the job, but that you don't think of as learning. Much of it is tacit. So in order to for people to really know what they've learned incidentally, you have to help them become better critical reflectors. I can't tell you the number of times we've interviewed people about critical incidents of learning. And afterwards, they'll say, I didn't know I learned anything until you asked me. People think that they haven't learned unless they learned it in school or from a book, right? Um, but truly, many of the more important lessons we've learned have been these lessons that happen, you know, just in coincident to doing something else. You're on a big project with someone and they say something and you turn and look at them and, oh my God, I never thought of that. That insight then leads you down a whole different path of exploration, and that allows you to solve a problem that was perhaps really difficult. So incidental learning is, that learning that happens coincident to problem solving or to dialogue with other people or something else, rather than by design. That's the key piece. And because it is so often tacit, the second key piece is that you often almost don't know that you learned until you sit down and think about it and reflect. Kind of where did that idea come from? Um, you know, so does that help?
Yeah. My question, I'm thinking about it. Can incidental learning be expected?
It can be fostered. Is that what you mean?
Like if I go into work like for the next week, and I mean, how often what the frequency of incidental learning happens? Like once every week or three? I mean, once every day? What is expectation to a job holder, to a performer, to have incidental learning? What the frequency of it? And
Daily.
or can we expect that person must have one incidental learning, or can be measured during 1 week of work? Can we expect that?
I think that you'll find that people are learning incidentally almost daily, but that but
Mhm.
but only critical incidents will stand out to them. So and it's very difficult to measure. Actually, there are
Mm.
people that have tried. I find you can't do it without qualitative techniques. That you can interview people, and I use critical incident interviews, and I can get at incidental learning. But
Mhm.
we have a questionnaire on learning practices that we've just validated, and it looks at the to what extent does an organization provide formal, informal, and incidental learning opportunities. And what
Mhm.
we found is that any learning practice can be informal or incidental. It just depends on how much consciousness there was in the design of that activity. And but the kinds of things that we talk about are often you know walking side by side a subject matter expert and asking them a question. You walk down the hall, that hallway conversation becomes a powerful learning moment for someone because you answered the right question. Um, so yes, you could strategically plan to have more of those. In fact, Harvard has something that we've been using in the Geneva Learning Foundation called, and I've been using in my classes actually because it works really well. It's called randomized coffee trials. So I don't know if you've heard of that yet, but you can look at it.
Can you repeat?
It's
Pardon?
it's it's from Harvard. It's called randomized coffee trials. It's a play on, the government funds all these randomized trials, and so they call them randomized coffee trials. And basically, what you do is you randomly, put two people's name in a hat or whatever, and
Got
ask them
it.
to go have coffee together. So we have virtual
Right.
coffees, and it's a way to break the ice for people that don't know each other, to grow your social network, because we know that your social network enhances your knowledge, and it changes the capacity of the organization. So these strategies, these incidental strategies, can be encouraged by an organization. It's really hard to measure them, though.
Uh, uh, your last sentence actually is my question. Can it be measured? Can it be
They
part
can
of
be
the form?
captured. They can be captured and become part of in other words, you can ask questions and you can find out what happened. But it's not like you can, it's pretty hard to get the same learning analytics that you would get in a training program, right?
Mhm. So
But
incidental learning.
I'm not sure that would be a good idea anyway. The key piece about informal and incidental learning is that it's characterized heavily by autonomy, learner autonomy. So
Mhm.
they don't work very well when mandated. I was on a study in
Yeah.
Barcelona where she looked at community of practice, one set mandated and one voluntary. And of course, the voluntary outperformed the other one enormously.
Yeah, yeah, of course, of course. How's incidental learning different from intentional learning then?
It's all about the intention. That in intentional learning, you form a goal and you have an intention to learn.
Right.
In incidental learning, my intention is to talk with you about a problem I'm having. I
Mm.
learn only if you solve my problem in some way or you speak to something I don't already know. So, I go do a random search on the internet and I come across a whole body of knowledge I hadn't known was there. Um, and suddenly that becomes part of my repertoire. So that's the difference. In intentional learning, I'm seeking something, I'm going after knowledge, um, and um, and in incidental learning, knowledge comes my way.
Is it is incidental learning different from like just-in-time training?
Very much because just-in-time training is training designed. Remember,
Right.
the key, with informal and incidental learning is learner control. Think about mentoring. You
Hmm.
mandate mentoring, does it work? Not
Hmm.
as well. It's
Hmm.
when the mentors find each other that it works really well. So you can mandate coaching, but again, the coaching relationship has to become something people want. It has to have that level, some level of autonomy to be
Right.
powerful and effective. And so that's a core attribute of informal and incidental learning.
Okay.
So you
That's
see, you
that's
see, you see how I keep coming back to it's all
yeah,
about changing the learning capacity. If you
yeah.
change the learning capacity of the organization, people want to learn.
Right.
People.
Learning autonomy, learner control are the key, I think.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, yep.
I see that they try to
If you create that, you get the capacity in the organization, and the culture is different.
right, right. And the incidental learning most of the times there happens at individual level instead of organizational level.
Yes. Oh yeah, I can't imagine what made up.
Of course.
Probably is a way to think about it,
Right.
but I
Right.
haven't figured it out.
Right.
I think a group could have incidental learning.
A group, yeah, a group. Smaller groups can
Yes, I think they can.
like pair them up and peer coaching and something like that.
Yeah, surprise happens all the time, right?
Right, right. Anyway, I know we have to observe our time. I know you
Yes,
have a hard stop in 5 minutes, and
yes.
I will go directly to my last two questions, wrapping up. If you had a chance to start all over again, what would have you done differently?
Yeah, I thought about that. I get asked a similar kind of question a lot. And, what I tell people is, I think I have the best job on the planet, really. I get to study, in an area that I love, and I get to invite people into it. So I can grow new people who go out and do learning and development, and I can bring faculty into being in this job who will also make it their life's work to carry on a passionate interest in learning and development and how we make it better and more effective. So it would be hard for me to imagine doing something different in at least in my work life than what I've done. So
Great, great. As a closing statement, do you have any advice to the young practitioners in China and other developing countries as a whole?
I don't know if it's advice, but I certainly have encouragement. My students from China have been
Please.
fantastic. They're very hardworking, great thinkers. I have a student who's about to finish now, Bei Li, that is just brilliant, and just can't wait to see what she does when she goes back to China, because you'll love her. So I think that sort of deep thought, the capacity to work really hard, and really, I can see that it's going to create a future post-pandemic. Um,
Mhm.
it's going to be it's going to be really important for them to have those capacities as they enter the post-pandemic world. The work world is going to, World Economic Forum has a wonderful book called COVID-19, The Great Reset. And essentially,
Mm.
they argue that every sector of society across the globe will be impacted in pretty important ways. So I think, we need people who are scholar practitioners. They study the literature and they collect data on their own practice. They don't just look at the organization, they also look at how effective are we in learning and development, and what can we do differently, because you're going to have to pivot over and over again. I suspect this is not our last pandemic. I am working in a project with the World Health Organization, and we're doing, I'm evaluating an incredibly innovative digital program that we're working with immunization managers who are on the front line in this pandemic. And I can tell you there's a lot to worry about right now. So I think we have to be people who are willing to evaluate our work and improve it continuously. So I think, as you think about these 7 dimensions, there's a way in which they create a kind of a set of strategies for me as an individual as well. I need to enhance my ability to do dialogue and inquiry and so on. So I think the future will be very strong in China. I think China is positioned very well. You have some great emerging scholars, I believe, coming through the works, and so I think the future will be difficult, and I think you're prepared to meet it. So I wish you only the best.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much for all of your work, and
Oh, you're
thank you for
welcome.
all of your great work. I mean, I learned a lot. Thank you
Oh,
so much for spending 1.5 hours with us on the show, and sharing so many profound knowledge and application guidelines to all of our viewers in China. Thank you again.
thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
We would
Great to
like
meet
to
you,
hear
George.
from you more. Yeah, glad to
Yes,
meet you too.
I have to come back to China for sure. So
You're more than welcome, and you must make another stop in Shanghai next time,
absolutely.
or you come to Beijing. I'll meet you in Beijing.
Okay. No, actually, I've set my novel in Shanghai, so Shanghai is on my must visit list. So
That'd be great. I can be the tour guide of Shanghai. I know much more about Shanghai more than 20 years ago now.
well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
look forward to it.
Me too. Me too. Take care and enjoy the fall colors. Thank
I
you.
will. Take care.
We'll keep in touch by email.
Thank you, George.
That's my interview with Dr. Karen Watkins. How do you feel? I really like it. I really like her style. During our interview just now, we covered a lot of topics. She is indeed a very good instructor, and we covered a lot of topics, including learning, including OD, organizational development, and the learning organizations. And also we talk about her dimensions of learning organization measurement. So there's a lot of topics that we covered. And also we talk about HRD. What is HRD and what does it include? And toward the end, we also talk about incidental learning. That's another research area throughout decades. She and other scholars spend time on. So incidental learning is also very important in this VUCA era and also to our works. So Dr. Watkins, thank you so much for your decades of devotion and contribution to our field. We learned a lot, and we look forward to apply your dimensions in China at universities, corporate universities and learning organizations, and help us grow faster and more efficiently. Thank you. Next week, we are going to have another heavyweight, very well-known performance consultant and visual artist. Her name is Lynn Kearney. So we're going to have the very honor to have Lynn on our interview. Lynn is a seasoned and a very experienced senior performance consultant, but she distinguished herself from other performance consultants. She is an artist. She paints, and she uses her painting skills in performance consulting projects, in communications. I want to say this: communication is always among the top priorities and skills for all consultants and for all professionals of any sort. And what Lynn is good at is visual communication. Visual communication is how to draw things, how to draw pictures, and to use one picture to save 1,000 words. And that will create very high level of efficiency for all consulting projects and communications with clients and among teams. Do you want to learn it? Do you want to see how do I learn it? So next Wednesday, until next Wednesday, please stay safe, stay well, stay tuned. Thank you, and good night.